So welcome everyone. Very excited to have you here and with us today. My name is Stephanie Birtles. I'm a professor at Simon Fraser University's Beatty School of Business, and it's my absolute pleasure to be moderating this panel today. Our conversation brings together business school deans and business school students to examine what role business schools play in equipping students and alumni with the skills they need to contribute to a purpose economy. I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. We're joined today by Dr. Anne-Marie Coteau. Anne-Marie is the Dean of the John Molson School of Business at Concordia University and Chair of the Business School Association of Canada. So welcome, Anne-Marie. I'm also thrilled to introduce Dr. Ujjwal Kayande. I'm delighted to say that Ujjwal is our incoming Dean at the Beatty School of Business at Simon Fraser University. So welcome, Ujjwal. I also like to introduce Maxime Lacat. Maxime is the founder and chair of the Canadian Business Youth Council for Sustainable Development. And finally, Dr. Daphne Taras. Daphne is Dean of the Ted Rogers School of Management at X University. So just setting the stage, our panel today explores the social purpose of business education and how business schools can live up to that purpose. As the architects and as the proponents of the shareholder view, business schools have fundamentally shaped how generations of future leaders think about the role of business in society. Of late, I think it's fair to say that some are beginning to really challenge that view. In the chat, you're going to find a link to the Purpose Education in Canadian Business Schools preliminary scan that was recently released by the Social Purpose Institute at the United Way. In that, you will see that while many schools have embraced programming focusing on sustainability, systems thinking, corporate responsibility, and social entrepreneurship and social innovation, and responsible investment, with few exceptions, and currently only one course at BCIT have really turned their attention to purpose. And so I want to start with Anne-Marie. I want to ask you, what is the societal purpose of a business school?
All right. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you all. Before I answer your question, I'd just like to introduce John Molson a bit more. We welcome close to 10,000 students. 85% of them are at the undergraduate level. The rest are part of the MBA, MSc, PhD programs. About 17% of our students are international. And we have about 130 full-time faculty members and about the same number of practitioners. We teach part-time, so it brings the, I could say, real-life experience for our students. And of course, we offer co-op programs, and our students compete and host international case competitions at both levels, undergraduate and graduate. Now, to answer your question, I would say that our main purpose, of course, is to train our students to learn how to better our society, thanks to research and the teaching we do. But to that point, I'd like to take our mission just to say how important this is to us, which is to provide an engaging learning and research environment that empowers us, and the us is very large, student, faculty, staff, alumni, business community, to achieve our greatest potential for the betterment of business and society. So already we're thinking about it this way. As we'll discuss today, most business schools have a strategic plan. So already we have to think about our purpose. We have to define our vision, missions, values, strategic imperatives. Therefore, what is our purpose? It's also mean that we have to measure what we do, and this at various levels. And I can give you some examples of what business schools do. Of course, we contribute to society through our intellectual contributions by running applied, rigorous, impactful academic research. Also, most business schools will have courses, as you mentioned, on ethics, corporate social responsibility, and sustainability. And when it comes to a purpose, it's also to have an economic impact. by, for example, helping entrepreneurs being successful in their journey, who themselves will contribute to our economy. Uh, it's also important to teach best practices in sustainability and therefore have a different type and positive economic impact. I'll take another example from my school. 2 years ago, we partnered with Manulife Investment to offer our students Canada's first sustainable investing university practicum. It means that our students are coached by their experts and they learn how to manage a portfolio specialized in sustainable investment. So not only will they be exposed to this, but I hope that they will carry this with them later on. In some cases, we also have a social impact. Another example, we have a special program at the MBA level that was founded 13 years ago that we call Community Services Initiatives. We love to call it CSI. Before the show, its purpose is to encourage and promote community service and link all our resources at John Molson with the needs of communities, including nonprofit organizations, social enterprises, small businesses, and the likes. We first started with the Black community. Actually, our leader is a Black person, and he thought we have to do something about our teenagers who are dropping off of school. So his idea, and it's a great one that we keep doing it, is we bring them on campus and we expose them to basic notions of business administration. And we also have some forum where they are exposed to entrepreneurs, inspiring CEOs, and so on. So our goal really is to first demystify what higher education is and also give them an objective that, oh, I can do it. I can go to school and eventually to John Molson, but what matters the most is that we keep them in school. This is a very successful initiative organized by our MBA students. So our MBA students learn from this as well, and we do it every summer. Another initiative we had very recently, we collaborated with the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation to help them reposition their strategy when it comes to marketing and social media. And as you may know, this foundation is very involved in the protection of environment, the promotion of sustainable development at the local and global scale. Therefore, when we talked to our MBA students about it, their mission spoke volume to them, and they were just thrilled to be engaged with the foundation. Now, back to what we see in business schools, some others will have an impact at the cultural level. I'm thinking of our colleague here at HSA Montreal, who offers a master in international arts management. And recently at Memorial, they have a new degree in music and business. So as you can see, that's another form of impact or purpose. Now, when it comes to societal impact, some others will talk about applied learning. And then it comes to co-op programs, internships. So in a nutshell, I think our main role as business schools leaders, of course, is to offer our students the greatest job opportunities, to train them well with purpose, to get them ready to embrace their adult life with the right tools and values that they need to contribute to the local communities, but also to the world, and therefore have a positive impact. I would like to end my remark on a mission that I really like. It's not ours, but I'll share this with you. It's the Gordon Lang School of Business and Economics at Guelph. Their mission states this way: the Lang Business School is leading the shift to a more sustainable, responsible, and equitable world through game-changing research. Their faculty, or our faculty in their case, would be shedding light on how business can better our world, while their alumni and students are inspired to use business as a force for good. Use business as a force for good. So I think it speaks volume to what we're trying to do here and speak about. Thank you. I'll stop here.
It's an exciting vision indeed, and
Thank you.
certainly I know that that we're seeing an evolution in the purpose statements articulated by business schools, and so it's exciting to see that, and I'm sure that Maxime will be challenging us to make sure that we live up to those statements as well in what we teach and how we go about teaching it. So Daphne, to serve a societal purpose, it's going to be really, really important that business schools are reflective of society. And I know you have strong thoughts about this. So what can business schools do to ensure equity and access, and as well, once we have students there, to ensure inclusion?
Stephanie, this is a tough question and we're all grappling with it. So everybody that's listening is grappling with this question. But at one time, business schools were not the behemoths that they are today. They were not concerned with equity and inclusion, and they tended to certify the already privileged, and they replicated themselves as they grew. So I've had a lot of opportunity to think about these matters, especially I would be a bad dean indeed if I didn't talk about my own school. So I'm going to do a little bit of what Anne-Marie did. At the Ted Rogers School of Management, we are in the middle of gritty downtown Toronto, not where U of T is, but in the shadow of U of T, but near the Eaton Centre. And it's arguably the largest university-based business school in Canada, and certainly 100% it's the largest in English Canada. But it's not the size that's the issue. It's the fact that 70% of our students are on government tuition assistance programs. 40% of the students in my school do not have either parent that had advanced education. And the majority of my students are not white, and there is no one group that dominates. So we are really a mix of the Canadian experience. But they're not international students. So even though most of my students were born outside of Canada, and if you walk through my school, it looks like an international agglomeration of everybody, only 5% of my students are international. The rest of them actually are new Canadians. And so as an immigrant myself, I'm very dedicated to removing the barriers of that prevent societal integration. But here are 4 problematic practices that we have taken for granted in business schools. Number 1 is we accept students with high math scores and good grades. The acceptance of grades and especially math scores without any further consideration basically is associated with hands-on parenting, with tutors, with small class sizes, with great teacher selection by private schools. It is possible to learn calculus on YouTube, but how many students actually do this? So the focus on what qualifies a student from high school is number 1 barrier. A number 2 barrier is the very deep and wonderful extracurricular activities that business schools really celebrate tend to reinforce the privilege of students who already have the time available to them time is a luxury that most of my students do not have because they're working. And so I've been trying to get course credit for a lot of the extracurricular. I'm trying to get the extracurricular activities onto the mothership. So what we've done is we've barricaded our mothership with very delicious things that sound great, but they privilege the already privileged. So that was number 2. Number 3, again, clubs and extracurriculars, alumni events, mentoring, these tend to allow alike clusters to form, and people tend to replicate themselves. When I was dean before in Saskatchewan, we had JDC West, and I know Simon Fraser is very involved in JDC West, but we had never had a single Indigenous student on any of the teams because those teams replicated themselves again and again and again, and they were not open to others. And so we had to break that silo. And the 4th thing is that Canadian students in particular tend to exclude students with accents, who have different clothing, who come from different places, or have unknown backgrounds. And there's a presumption that those students bring down grades. That, oh, shoot, we've got this student in our group now that we have to tolerate, rather than seeing them as a source of inspiration in different practices. So here are 4 things that I think are really important for business schools to do. First of all, career services have to really devote themselves to genuinely mentoring and introducing students to employers. Not just the students that come to them, because those are already the privileged students. The second thing is co-op, paid co-op. At our school, we went from 300 paid co-op placements to 2,300 this year. 2,300 paid co-op placements, a growth in only 3 years that is inconceivable. We did it, but that growth brought $68 million directly into the hands of students. So at precisely the point that students need the money the most, and they need to have relevant Canadian experience on their CVs in order to break in, we gave it to them. And so it's paid off tremendously for us because we already have such diverse students. But employers now come to us because they know they can reach their EDI objectives. Because if they interview our students, 70% of our students will help a company achieve EDI. If they go to our competitor business schools, maybe 20%. And so they have to, they have to always be looking, they have to be struggling to find EDI, and we've made it extremely normal. Our students are flying off the shelf because not only do we find co-op placements for them, but we train them before they go off into co-ops. So they add value. They have high-level Excel skills, Tableau, self-presentation. We train them in a very hands-on way so that they're highly desirable. So even if someone tries to replicate the type of student that they were when they were in high school, we basically are providing a different product to them that does not reinforce privilege, but actually shows value. And we, the third thing we did was we had randomization of community learning packs. So we have everything in my school is, TED is based on Ted Rogers. So we have TED packs. And during the pandemic, we created at random, we randomized all of our incoming students into TED packs of 45. So community-based learning, we will continue doing it because it basically stopped those privilege silos from starting. And the students were registered in all 5 of their incoming classes together. We created their own communication shell, their own tutoring of each other. And so we tried to give people a different sense. Finally, the fourth thing, our clubs, actually, our student clubs are strongly discouraged from selecting students like themselves. And they use advertisements, seeking a vice president finance for our student society based on knowledge and skills. And they do interviews. And then they are trained to look for the person who matches what their needs are. And so if you look at my school, there is no phony baloney diversity going on or virtue signaling, hey, let's call the Black kid in to sit in this photo op because it looks too white otherwise. Like, this is genuinely our students mixing, but it's not by magic. We have done things to make it happen. So the conclusion that I have is that we're doing very concrete things to ensure that our students are joining the economic engine of Canada. We're trying hard to break the perpetuation of barriers. When I participate with other deans of business schools across North America, and I'm not dissing my colleagues here, we've all agreed to be on this panel because we care, but I often think to myself, although not out loud, because it's a stupid dean that lets their thought bubble out of their mouth, but I'm going to do it now, that there's way too much talk and too little innovation. So over and over and over, I'm hearing the greenwashing of business schools without the difficult action that is used to break barriers. So not easy to do, but that's my answer to your question. There are ways of doing it.
Thanks, Stephanie. I really appreciate it. So one of the other constraints that business schools operate within are accreditation programs. And while in some ways accreditation programs are moving towards societal purpose and are trying to push businesses to business schools to live up to that purpose, they also can create constraints. So Ujwal, the 2 accreditation programs, the ACSB and the EQUIS, so one program that's predominantly has sort of started predominantly in the Americas. The other sort of has been more of a European initiative. Many schools in Canada hold both accreditations. Both are encouraging schools to articulate a purpose and to align the program delivery with that purpose. Are our current business school programs fit for purpose? And what would we emphasize in what we currently teach in research? And then how might our efforts need to shift? So are we teaching and researching the right things in Canadian business schools?
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I'd love to do what Daphne and Anne-Marie did about their schools, but of course, as you know, I'm just an incoming dean, and so all I'm going to actually say at the start is that I got excited about the opportunity at Simon Fraser University because of all the emphasis that Simon Fraser University, and in particular the BD School of Business, had on creating equal opportunity, on equity, on diversity, on social impact. And so that's the sort of stuff that really excited me. And many of you folks here would not know that I did my PhD in Canada 25 years ago as an international student. I came in from India. I would have never been able to do a PhD had it not been for the support of the Canadian people. So I'm coming back in some senses to the country that gave me so much. Now, I should also add that I am very sure, Steph, that you think that we don't do enough at the SFU-BD school and that we have to do a lot more. And I think that's probably a good segue into what I want to talk about next, which is how these accreditation programs are shaping what we do, but also are creating constraints for us. So if I could just talk through what I've seen across business schools rather than just Canadian business schools, and I've had experience across the world in terms of how education programs are designed and delivered, is that the accreditation process is considered to be something that is great in terms of the outcome that we want to achieve, which is we are accredited and we have double, triple, quadruple accreditations. That's a big deal for deans across and for business schools across the world. The question really is how do we go about that process of getting accreditation? And oftentimes what I've observed, and this is no statement on my current school or on the SFU-BD school in any way, is that in many parts it is actually a box-ticking exercise rather than something that's really systemic. So it's almost as if there is a bit of a band-aid that's applied because it's the accreditation year. Let's start getting things in place. This might be a bit controversial to say, but this is what I've observed across the world. And I haven't observed it at a SFU-BD school, so this is absolutely no statement on the BD school. So I think that is the first thing that has to change, and that change can't come, in my view, from the accreditation agencies. It really has to come internally from the schools that we're part of. Because you can always say, I'm going to respond to regulation or to accreditation, or you can say that I'm going to do these things because they are the right things to do, and this is how we would like to shape society for the future. And so I think that shift has to occur, and I have to say there are schools that do try to do that, and I'm in great admiration of them. And I think Daphne just actually talked through all of the things that are happening in her school, and Marie did exactly that. And so that's terrific to see. But that's not widespread across the board. And in fact, what is concerning is that the more you go up the ladder in terms of the more highly ranked schools, the less you observe these things occurring. And that is distressing because it is possible that many of the students who graduate from these top schools will in fact perhaps be more likely to be leaders for whatever reason, for whatever societal bias reasons there are. And so they then continue to shape how businesses operate into the future. And so that's a big issue in my view, that I think these accreditation agencies are not doing what they need to do. how can business schools really change how they go about doing these things? It is truly to work through, doing the right things, to ensure that the purpose of business schools and of business is not just a shareholder primacy. And that's one of the biggest issues we face. It's really stakeholder primacy. And that needs to then get, completely infused within the organization in terms of what we do, what we teach, and what we research as well. The invisible hand of the market, which is really, governed shareholder primacy, is actually no longer invisible. It is actually very visible. We can see the negative effects of this invisible hand of the market, not necessarily the positive effects. And it's all around us. You, Steph, are in British Columbia today, and you know how devastated it is since the summer because of all the things that are going on in the environment. And if business doesn't care about that, then I think we've got a real problem. But business schools not caring about that is an even bigger problem, because our job is to shape future society and also to match, what we teach to the sort of things that that future society needs. And in fact, Maxime is probably going to talk about what is required for the future. And so I think from that perspective, it's really, important for us to not just be governed by accreditation, but be governed by what we would like to do. Now, to close this off, I mean, I have to say, I fully support Anne-Marie and Daphne and what they said. We have to start practicing what we preach internally. And that's, first of all, we need to preach the right things. But if we were preaching the right things, then we need to practice those things internally. And that's really critical from our perspective. I have to also say, one of the reasons I'm coming to Canada is because, you folks might think that you're not there yet, but and that's probably true. But I think you're far advanced compared to other countries in the world. And so I think that's a credit to the Canadian people. But obviously, we need to go far beyond where we are at, and business schools in particular need to go far beyond where we are at. And I think the primary message I wanted to get across is that these changes have to be systemic, not Band-Aid, because a lot of accreditation efforts become Band-Aid efforts. And one great example of this is the teaching of ethics. We oftentimes, we want to teach ethics. So what do? We say, okay, well, we're going to have an ethics course, and students are all going to go through that ethics course. The next step to that is we're going to have some small component of ethics within each one of the courses that we teach. That all of those things are just Band-Aids. I think to truly have systemic change, we have to treat ethics, for example, or stakeholder primacy as the primary North Star that we're looking at in terms of all that we teach and research. So I think it's probably a good time then, Steph, for us to hear from the future of society. And back to you.
That's perfect. Thank you. So, and I'll just forewarn our deans that there's a question that has emerged and I think it's a great question, is that business schools have been reinforcing a planet destroying, and I would add as well a model that has also done a lot to widen inequality in society. And so what do we do about that? How as business school deans do you respond to that? But first, I think it is really important to hear from the voice of students, from the voice of our future business leaders. Maxime, are business schools living up to their societal purpose? Do they actually practice what they preach? And are there areas where they are falling short?
Great, thank you. Can you hear me well? Perfectly. Well, thank you so much to the three deans for sharing your thoughts. And to answer your question, Stephanie, it's not an easy black or white answer for sure. I'll definitely try to challenge the discussion as much as possible. But before that, I would still like to recognize that there's definitely been positive progress in the past few years. So more and more business professors, for example, have been challenging profit and shareholder primacy. So we have more and more professors now teaching things like social entrepreneurship, impact investing, and other topics. We also have university rankings that actually now look more and more at how the curriculum is integrating the UN Sustainable Development Goals and contributing to solutions to tackle these SDGs. We also have more and more research, more than ever in the past few years, that have been published by professors on how to leverage the power of the private sector to tackle sustainability issues. And finally, accreditation bodies, not like ASCCB, but more like CPA and CFA, have been also evolving on their standards and expectations. Most recently, CFA Montreal recognized that a good understanding of environmental, societal, and governance factors is really key for employees. So that's really positive progress. However, there are definitely limitations in that progress. The first one is that these discussions and concept around sustainability and purpose-driven business models are very often siloed in a very few dedicated courses that impact only a minority of students, rather than being mainstreamed really across all study areas through, for example, the creation of a specialized course in each field. So, for example, one course on sustainable finance in the finance major, one course on sustainability accounting in the accounting major, one on purpose marketing, et cetera, et cetera. So these specialized courses are still lacking today to really be required in all the majors in business schools. But also where it's siloed is even if you have those specialized courses, you end up not being referenced to these key concept around sustainability in the more traditional courses, those that don't have a sustainability focus. And there's a huge gap between these courses and the other ones, although these traditional courses, even if their focus is not on sustainability, they could still have, a few guest speakers, a few case studies throughout their course that still reference sustainability concepts. So that's the first limitation of that progress is really the siloing of sustainability throughout the curriculum. I'm not a dean, so I won't be able to speak about all the great things that McGill are doing the same way that the previous deans have. However, I would still like to talk very quickly about my experience at McGill. Since it was actually the only university I applied to when I finished high school. It was the only one. It was a risky choice, but I only applied to it because back then it had an entire major and concentration in the business school that focused on sustainability while being cross-faculty, so different faculties I was exposed to, and entirely dedicated to that. And back in 2015, that was a very rare thing. So the program definitely fulfilled some of my expectations, and now we can see more and more schools in Canada that have concentrations and programs on sustainability. However, it still remains a tiny minority of students that are in those sustainability-focused programs, and there's often a complete disconnect, that as I said earlier, between what is being taught in many traditional courses and those more advanced courses on sustainability. And that disconnect doesn't help students who, on the one hand, understand that there's a crisis, that there are new models to use, and there are other courses that simply reuse the traditional model. So that disconnect is very apparent. And even in McGill, that is such a great university on sustainability, still has some progress to do. One of the consequences of those limitations is that overall conversations in business schools around sustainability focus on how to reduce the negative impacts of companies, so to reduce the irresponsible practices, rather than focusing more on the purpose-driven business models, to respond to the question in the comment section. And there's not enough focus throughout the schools on how can we increase the company's positive impact. So how can we really leverage their resources to contribute to solutions rather than just reducing their negative impact? One illustration of this consequence is in finance. So in finance now, we have more and more sustainable finance courses throughout the country. It's still a nascent trend, but we see positive progress for sure. Unfortunately, when we hear about sustainable finance in business schools, we often hear about responsible investment. So for those of you who don't know, responsible investment is where investors look at ESG factors, so environmental, societal, and governance rankings of those companies, and they use it as a risk management tool to ensure we don't invest in companies that are completely irresponsible, because those that are irresponsible are usually riskier when it comes to investing in them, their stock prices and all that. So we'll use responsible investment, but we'll tend much less to speak about impact investing, which intentionally aims at investing in companies whose core purpose and business model is around solving a social and environmental issue. It's not a side thing, it's not a CSR, it's really at the core purpose of their business model. And impact investing is really investing in those companies. And both responsible investment and impact investing are actually complementary, and both are important. But today in Canada, actually in the world, sorry, the responsible investment global market size is $30 trillion, which is a lot of money, 30 trillion, whereas impact investing is only above $700 billion. So there's a huge gap, 30 trillion versus 700 billion. So if we want to go back to some of what the Dean said, which is preparing the next generation of leaders to create a prosperous society, if we really want the generation of employees to push the conversation further, to push the private sector further, we need to start talking to them, for example, in this case, about impact investing and really helping them to bring the capital even further than just responsible investment. The final point I'm going to make to answer that question on whether business schools are really living up to their societal purpose, I really absolutely loved what Daphne said about the importance of diverse students and making sure we're going beyond just the privileged few. What I would like to add on to that is, if we want to build a more equitable society, we need more diverse leadership. And one key part of more diverse perspectives is to have more Indigenous business leaders in the spotlight, right? And currently there's a big gap in education received by Indigenous youth. And a related issue to that is that we as non-Indigenous business students absolutely never hear in our business school classes about what mainstream business can learn from Indigenous ways of doing business, which are actually often much more aligned with the idea of purpose-driven models and responsible practices. So we don't learn from their ways of doing. We also don't learn how to equitably integrate Indigenous voices at the decision-making table when operating on their lands and communities. And I think really bridging those two gaps in terms of what we learn from them and what we bring to those communities is really going to be key for reconciliation, to have a society with a higher social cohesion between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. I don't have all the solutions on this issue, and obviously business schools cannot do everything. There are very systemic barriers regarding Indigenous people. However, there are still things that business schools can do about it. And I will send on the chat right now a link to a United Nations Principles for Responsible Management Education webinar on how to decolonize and indigenize business schools and business education. So the webinar will have a lot of answers as well on that specific point.
Thank you, Maxime. It's super important, incredibly important work that we need to be doing. I am pleased to say that last week I spent the week helping to design a new core course for our BBA program, where Indigenous wisdom will be front and center in our discussions about the purpose of the business and business society. So it's coming, but it's not coming fast enough, and that's for sure. So speed round, folks, because I want to leave some time for discussion. I also want to note there was a comment from Sue that I agree with, that that we're seeing actually students are coming in much more prepared around these issues, much more aware and knowledgeable about these issues. Frankly, often more knowledgeable than our own faculty, many of our own faculty on these issues. And I would argue in a lot of cases also more knowledgeable than our alumni. So Daphne, what do we do about all those students that we trained to operate in a way that is not serving a societal and social purpose? So what role can we play in re-engaging them and equipping them with the right knowledge and skills to actually deliver on a social purpose economy?
Okay, I'm going to do what politicians do, Stephanie. I'm going to just park that question and just, I'll answer it in a minute. But because of my inspiration of the previous three speakers, I just want to say that I recruit and mentor a huge number of new professors. And the new generation already is extremely, the one thing that the new generation of professors have in common is they're extremely knowledgeable and they integrate these materials into their curriculum. Whether it's an intro marketing course or intro finance course, but we have a phenomenal structural issue in business schools with lack of turnover. So people do not leave. And if you have the same person who was trained from 1970 when finance was king, then you have money as the measure of success. So, what we have to do is be continuously aware that we should be fostering opportunities for the professors that we hire to innovate, because I have seen no shortage of innovative ideas among I just hired 35 professors in the last 3 years. Let them loose and the school curriculum will be fixed. But all of the restrictions and the 2 years of things that it goes through to get Senate approval, that is just the most crapola part of our jobs, and it's awful. So the other thing that we did was we hired 4 PhDs who have PhDs in philosophy who are teaching. It's not an accounting professor at the corner of their expertise who says, maybe I'll do a case that involves accounting ethics. So we've brought into our school a very rich group of new professors who are trained at the highest levels in ways of thinking and challenging. And it's starting to have, we're starting to rank, Corporate Knights has discovered, my hypothesis is, that because of all our new hiring, without us having to change our mission statement and our values and all this stuff, because we brought in this wave of new professors who are publishing on these matters that we're talking about, all of a sudden we popped out ahead of Guelph and ahead of any other school as being, either number 3 in the MBA, number 1 in undergraduate for sustainability in Corporate Knights. We didn't mean to do it. I will be frank with you all, we didn't mean to do it. It's by aggressive hiring that the change happens. So my institutional theory background is, whoa, there was something we did right, and what we did right was hire. But about alumni, first of all, we haven't trained our business students properly. We trained them using American textbooks and American cases that it's shareholder primacy. And in Canada, the law actually is different, and it's stakeholder, not shareholder. And we haven't really made hay while the sun shone with that difference. And so that difference already exists for us, yet we continue to train our students in a very US kind of based model. And I would say we should be looking at our own homegrown textbooks. We should be not replicating the kind of AACSB business education that all we do is sort of Canadianize the textbooks a little bit, but we should be rewriting them altogether. We're a resource extraction country. We have completely different profiles. We have different values, ethics, and we should be writing our own materials. We should be rewarding, when we look at our alumni, we should be rewarding the alumni that have much longer time horizons. So nothing is worthwhile or impactful that takes less than 10 years to achieve. So I used to have guest speakers in from the alumni, and instead of trying to find the people that would turn over, they made $1 billion from selling their company and they exited after only 3 years, I try not to celebrate short time horizons. And I try to have the speakers deliberately talk about how it took so long. And the problem right now we're facing, and I'll sort of end with this thought, our new generation, because of social media, we think in terms of sparkles and fireflies and how many Facebook, how many tweets did we get and what, and that is not long-term thinking. So we also have to deprogram our students and our alumni to think longer term. And that is very, very hard when finance became king and new ventures and entrepreneurship became so strongly associated with business schools. So I'm trying hard to develop family business, sustainable family business, sales. I'm trying to honor finance, but say that the skills of the future are different and reach out to different alumni. And say, congratulations on what you did. We want to hear from you. So I'm more conscious when I'm reaching out. And that's really within my power as a dean. The other stuff, I don't know if I have the power to do.
So I want to ultimately give the last word to Maxime in terms of what he and members of his coalition are really demanding of business schools and the actions that they urge. But maybe quickly, just a one quick sentence, Ujwal, what do you think is going to help to catalyze this transformation? What actually needs to happen to make this shift in business schools? And what is the role of the deans in making this happen in particular?
Yes. So if the purpose of a business school is to shape future society, then our incentive mechanisms internally have to shift. Publishing 4 more papers isn't going to shape society. Getting a 4.9 out of 5 on teaching isn't going to shape society. We need to start rewarding faculty members who have an impact through their research and teaching. A great example of this is my future colleague, your current colleague, Feza Sahiniazam, who does work on humanitarian operations research. What a concept, right? And I think that is what we need to start rewarding. We need to start thinking about what is the impact of our faculty members' research and teaching, rather than what score did they get and how many papers did they publish. And I think that's going to start shifting the dial in terms of us actually practicing what we preach.
Well, I'm very in favor of that, Ujwal. So that's super exciting. Anne-Marie, and again, I want to leave for Maxime the time to give us some ideas. But Maxime or Anne-Marie, the Business Schools Association of Canada. So this is, a chance to get deans together and have conversations about these things. So what can be the leadership from the Business Schools Association with respect to societal purpose?
At our last BSAC conference, which was, 2 weeks ago, Daphne, about that, we had a great session organized by Brock, and they invited their AVP Indigenous, and she spoke to us about the values of the creeds, and just having all the deans exposed to their reality and their values. And actually it was beautiful, and it's all about great leadership, servant leadership, and so on. So just to have had that exposure to their culture was very, I would say, insightful and impactful for us. Also, BSAC wants to have EDI, anti-racism statement that will be shared among all the members of the association, where we can say, this is important to us. We have to take concrete actions to create safe space and inclusive space for our students and research. So at some point we create a better world, and it feels like we make a positive impact. And also I would say that a lot of Canadian business schools are looking into the 17 SDG and want to know where is it that we can use of one of these and try to make a difference and use that as, how could I say, where should we put more resources, maybe develop more research. And there's a lot to talk about. When we talk about water, is maybe not something we talk about in the business school, but it's critical. We see it now, and it's maybe something that supply chain people could look into more seriously, as an example. So I think we have a lot to do, and we can really make a difference. And just to close on the accreditation part, the new standards by AACSB, there's 2 new standards that are asking us to be more focused on societal purpose. We have to be more mindful and be able to measure what we do as well. So it's sort of new, but it's a transition. And it's now expected of business school to have such statements. So we're going in the right direction, I hope.
Good, I hope so too. So further comments, further takeaways, further provocations, please, from the audience, continue to add them in the conversation box. As I ask Maxime, what are the most urgent actions that business schools can and should be taking?
Absolutely. Thank you. First of all, I'm sending a message right now in the chat with the key speech points. I've done a beautiful PDF, so you can all click on that and have it later on if you want to have all the key recommendations, and also a centralized public drive folder that we sent to 90 different business school deans already in Canada, 200 professors, and also actually hundreds from outside of Canada during a United Nations speech. So to answer your question, Stephanie, for a little bit of context to everybody, the recommendations I'm about to give are based on my organization's experience in this space, which basically consists of last year, where my organization created Canada's largest youth-led movement to change business education on sustainability, with 65 youth organizations that were consulted and helped co-create a manifesto that is called Our Future, Our Business, that is composed of 20 statements on what we see the future being, of business look like. And this movement ended up receiving the support from 130 of Canada's most influential corporate sustainability leaders and 100 civil society organizations that recognize that business education needs to change. So all that is on the links I sent. Now, to answer directly your question, I think what is good in terms of what schools need to do most urgently, we could do a comparison with government climate targets, right? COP26 just ended. For me, and for I think many youth, what matters is not anymore that business schools recognize that sustainability matters to them, and that it matters to business in general. That honestly is fairly simple with everything that has happened in the private sector and in civil society over the past few years. So for us, that's not the goal. For us, the goal is to determine how fast the transition to integrating sustainability in the curriculum is going to be, and how ambitious the goals are. So very concretely, some questions that could help, and once again, all that is on the link I sent that details my speech. For business schools, how fast? Some questions for that is it going to take over 5 years to really mainstream sustainability across the curriculum? Because we're going to make pledges, as Ojval said, we make pledges, but then are we really walking the talk? Are we really going to put the required amount of time, energy, and funding into it to make sure the transition is actually fast? Are we going to replicate one of the mistakes of COP26, which was to focus so much on distant, net zero by 2050, instead of mostly focusing on what we can do right now, every single year, with interim targets, maybe every year, every 2 years, but something really short-term and concrete. So that's in terms of how fast. Now, how ambitious, some questions that can help answer how ambitious your vision of sustainability is, because there are very different visions of what sustainable business should include or not. Some questions: are we going to have only one mandatory course on sustainability to everybody, and maybe a few courses specialized on sustainability here and there in different departments that go, only for minority of students? Or we really, really make sure every student really gets an exposure to in-depth sustainability, and not just at a high level. So that's one question in terms of how ambitious the transition should be. Another question is, are we going to recognize that current corporate sustainability practices in the private sector still very often include a lot of greenwashing, right? Whether it's intended or not, there's still a lot of greenwashing, and we need to make sure that the visionary frameworks that have been created to counter greenwashing in the private sector for companies, tools and frameworks for companies and investors, these exist. are we going to teach them to the next generation, so the next generation of business managers, employees, and leaders aren't unconsciously replicating these counterproductive greenwashing practices, right? Another question about how ambitious the vision is are we going to recognize that we cannot rely anymore on the false hopes of increased privatization? We constantly hear about privatizing everything because governments apparently are not as efficient and innovative as businesses, and that the private sector is the one that will truly save us. Are we going to really move away from that idea? Are we going to abandon the idea of trickle-down economics? Are we going to abandon the idea of shareholder primacy and neoliberal policies, which will never allow us to build the society we need? And the last question about how ambitious is, are we going to engage with the more challenging topics? That's for me really the most important one, is like how much critical thinking is going to happen in business schools around sustainability, like the idea that economic growth cannot be infinite in a planet with finite resources and finite boundaries, or the idea that truly responsible practices of a company that cares about social cohesion and combating climate change, we cannot separate from the responsible sustainability practice from a company and then the other practices that they're having on tax evasion, tax optimization, these harder and more challenging questions. Like, are we actually going to talk about these as well? And I'll close here, some very concrete actions that schools can take to overcome the barriers to change in business schools. As I said, as I put in the link, I will send it again after this. We actually built a 2-page recommendations report that we sent to all the business schools in the past few months that identifies the barriers that business schools are facing by interviewing them and understanding what they're facing in terms of challenges. And we offer solutions on how to overcome these challenges. So, some of the recommendations include creating a working group on sustainability within each business school. So each business school has their own working group on sustainability, and they review our manifesto, the 20 statements that go in depth about what we want to see the future of business to look like, or at least discussions we want to see more happen in business schools, and really develop a strategy for 2025 with incremental short-term targets, and ensure that on these working groups, there are at least 30% of student leaders or past student leaders on those, to really make sure that we shape business schools in line with what students want, and not just in a top-down way where it's business school faculty leadership and professors that determine the future. Second, and I will give a third one right after that, and I'll close it there. Professors can consider our manifesto's questions and challenges as potential research topics, since we do not pretend to have all the solutions and all the answers, and that we recognize that a lot of challenges and issues in the private sector still needs to be addressed with in-depth research to come up with best solutions. So professors definitely have a role to play, and our manifesto, I think, can be a good source of inspiration there. And finally, we have a report. We organized a Quebec roundtable in Quebec on the future of sustainable finance education, where we invited all the business finance profs to come to this roundtable to share best practices on how to integrate sustainability in their finance courses. And I'm going to send the link, but this debrief report we made from that roundtable is a very helpful framework to identify how sustainability can be integrated throughout the curriculum and not just finance. So I really invite you to look at that. Once again, I'm going to send you one link. Everything is on there.
Okay, I'm going to hop in, Maxime. Thank you. It's amazing. And my job in the 3 seconds that I have left is to just make sure that I thank every one of you for a really engaging conversation, your comments and ideas. It's clear that the conversation is only beginning. The work is only beginning on moving business schools towards serving a social purpose. So the work now falls to us in breakout rooms. So we invite you to please stay on, to please join us. Each of us will be heading into our own breakout room. We ask in those breakout rooms that you try and brainstorm 2 or 3 concrete steps, as Maxime has given us a lot of inspiration for what some of those steps might look like. Take a moment to introduce yourselves. Share what struck you as most important from the conversation, where we need to build, and then really try and spend your time thinking about concrete actions that could embed social purpose in business school education. And who in that is going to be best equipped to help take that forward. So I think that we will be whisked off to our virtual breakout groups now quite shortly. I just want to remind and thank again Anne-Marie and Ujwal and Maxime and Daphne. And so we will select and head ourselves into our own breakout rooms as well. Thanks, everyone, and see you in the breakout rooms. Thanks for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you.
Merci.